The fog tasted of salt and desperation. It clung low and thick to the dunes of Long Island, a suffocating blanket over the coast of New York in the early hours of November 1943. Private First Class Leo Maxwell, 20 years old and 2 months into his Coast Guard duty, tightened the strap of his M1 carbine and squinted into the gray void. The rhythmic crash of the Atlantic was the only consistent sound, a relentless, booming countdown in the oppressive quiet. Leo was patrolling a remote stretch north of Montauk, an area his superiors at Station 31 considered quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. The war, which felt like a distant, chaotic rumble over Europe and the Pacific, often manifested here as nothing more than U-boat rumors whispered in local diners and the mandatory nightly blackout that swallowed the streetlights of nearby towns. Tonight, however, the air felt different, heavy, charged with an unknown electrical current of tension. He paused near a clump of seagrass, his boots sinking slightly into the cold sand. The fog played tricks on his eyes, turning driftwood into the silhouettes of men and the sound of waves into muffled conversation. He scanned the horizon line, which was entirely swallowed by the haze. Nothing, just the endless, indifferent ocean. As he turned to continue his lonely trek, a faint, almost imperceptible cut through the wave of the sea. It was a scrape, the harsh drag of something heavy, perhaps a dinghy, being pulled across wet sand, followed by the muffled, guttural cadence of a language Leo did not recognize, yet immediately knew: German. A jolt of pure adrenaline, cold and sharp, shot through him. This is not a drill. His heart hammered a desperate rhythm against his ribs. He dropped to a crouch, his training finally clicking into place, overriding the paralyzing fear. He carefully eased the bolt back on his carbine, the metallic clack sounding deafening in the silence. He edged closer to the sound, creeping from the cover of the dunes. The darkness, though thick, began to yield vague shapes. 4, maybe 5 men, clad in dark, heavy, unfamiliar uniforms, were huddled around a rubber boat that was half submerged in the wash. They were securing equipment, long, cylindrical objects that looked suspiciously like demolition charges. One man stood taller, his posture military and commanding, even in the hunched activity. This man, Leo realized a sickening lure, was an off. His face was sharp and angular, partially visible when he turned his head, his eyes focused on the mission with cold, professional intensity. This was Major Klaus Richter, commander of the U-boat crew, though Leo had no way of knowing his name or rank. He only knew he was staring at the enemy on American soil. Leo knew he couldn't take on 5 armed, trained men. His primary order was to alert the station. But the realization that these men were preparing to detonate something vital, a bridge, a fuel depot, made his blood run cold. He had to delay them, capture one if he could, to prove the danger was real. A reckless, desperate impulse took hold. He aimed the carbine at Richter. "Halt! Coast Guard! Drop your weapons!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and command, amplified by the fog. The effect was instantaneous and chaotic. The Germans scattered, dropping their gear. The officer, Richter, however, reacted with surprising slowness, turning to face Leo with an expression of grim resignation. As the other crew members scrambled for cover in the gloom, Richter raised his hands, a gesture of surrender. "Do not shoot, boy," Richter said in heavily accented but perfect English, his voice low and steady, almost condescending. "I am Major Richter. We surrender. Let your comrades come and collect us." Leo, trembling, took a step forward, keeping the rifle trained on the major's chest. His mind was racing, a confusing mix of relief and suspicion. Too easy. "Get down on your knees! Hands on your head!" As Richter knelt, his gaze sweeping over the beach, he seemed to calculate an escape route. His eyes landed briefly on a piece of equipment dropped by one of his fleeing men, a small dark canister. It was in that moment of distraction that Leo fumbled the exchange. Attempting to manage the rifle, the growing suspense of the situation, and the darkness, Leo instinctively reached into his tunic pocket to steady his nerves, and pulled out not a handkerchief, but a small chrome square object. The major's eyes, until now calculating and cold, went wide with an intensity defied the. His controlled demeanor shattered. The object was a simple, everyday Zippo lighter, engraved with the initials LM. that Leo's father had gifted him before he shot. Leo, flustered, tried to shove it back, but not before instinctively flicking the brass. Click, thwump. A sudden sharp tongue of clean yellow flame erupted in the dense, gray fog. Major Richter didn't flinch from the carbine. He flinched from the fire. His eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed not on the gun, but on the dancing flame. He let out a gasp that was closer to a choked sob, scrambling backward on his knees, his hands thrown up not in surrender, but as if to ward off a physical burning attack. "Nine? What is that? Keep it away," Richter stammered, his perfect English dissolving into frantic German. "Das Feuer, das Beast." The fire? The beast? The reaction was so violent, so utterly disproportionate to the small flame, that Leo froze, lowering the rifle slightly in sheer bewildered confusion. The officer, a seasoned U-boat commander who had faced the raging Atlantic and the horrors of war, was reduced to a quivering, panic-stricken man by a common lighter. The major's outburst was witnessed by the 3 remaining crewmen who had taken cover behind a large dune and were now observing their captured commander. They saw their leader, the epitome of cold German efficiency, recoiling in stark terror from a small, ordinary object held by an untrained American boy. The man closest to them, a burly torpedo mechanic, Fisher, whispered in horrified awe, "Did you see that, Kurt? He didn't fear the gun, he feared that." Kurt, the communications officer, stared at the chrome object, the small, unwavering flame casting dancing shadows on the fog. "It is not ordinary fire. Look at Richter. He knows it. This is a weapon, a psychological or chemical weapon, designed to break command. The Americans, they have created something new." The original mission was instantly secondary. The panic in their commander's eyes had created a far greater, darker priority in the minds of the junior officer. The enemy held a terrifying, unknown device capable of inducing instant, crippling terror in a trained officer. It was a secret weapon that must be recovered. Leo, utterly baffled, snapped the Zippo shut, extinguishing the flame. The major instantly regained a semblance of control, his breathing ragged, his face pale and slack. He was immediately once again the composed, ruthless officer, but the panic in his eyes was a deep, unresolvable mystery. "Put it away, soldier," Richter managed, forcing his English back. "It is cold now. Very good. Take me to your superiors." The danger hadn't passed. It had merely changed. Leo had stumbled upon a secret that was not military, but deeply personal, and in doing so, he had unknowingly armed himself with the most powerful, misunderstood weapon on the beach. He had sparked a terror that would now chase him across the eastern seaboard. This is only the beginning of the mystery. Why did Major Richter react with such raw, primal fear to a common Zippo? What traumatic secret is hidden behind that brief, terrifying glimpse of the flame? To discover the true nature of the weapon and see if Leo can survive the German crew's frantic, desperate pursuit, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss Chapter 2. Leo Maxwell, his hands still slightly shaking, secured Major Klaus Richter with a pair of rusty handcuffs scavenged from the station's supply closet. The silence on the beach now felt even heavier, a vacuum where the initial chaos had. The fog, still dense, seemed to mock the concept of certainty. Richter walked ahead of him, his gait composed, the terrifying panic of the lighter incident completely internalized like a lock sprung shut. He was playing the role of the captured officer to perfection, yet his eyes constantly tracked their surroundings, not looking for an escape, but for signs of his mission. "You should know, soldier," Richter's low, smooth rumble, "that my mission was vital. By capturing me, you have complicated things for many people. And by landing on American soil, you complicated things for many more," Leo shot back, trying to sound tougher than he felt. He was still rattled by the Germans' reaction to the Zippo. The beast? It was nonsense. As they reached the edge of the dunes, a faint whistle, high and sharp, cut through the air, followed by a lower, resonant tone. Richter's head snapped up. He gave nothing away, but Leo saw a flicker of relief, or perhaps confirmation, in his eyes. It was a signal. His men were close. Leo didn't hesitate. He thrust the major forward. "Move! Faster! If your men show up, I won't wait for backup." Unbeknownst to Leo, back on the beach, the U-boat crew, Fisher, Kurt, and their demolition expert Hans, were gathered around the abandoned dinghy. The original mission, the sabotage, was dead. Richter's inexplicable terror had entirely rewired their operational priority. "We saw it, Hans," Fisher insisted, his face set in grim determination. The Major, a decorated Iron Cross recipient, was paralyzed by that tiny fire. "It's some kind of neural weapon." The small shine. "It must house the mechanism." Kurt, the technician, nodded, his mind already spinning with technical paranoia. The flicker of the flame. "It's a trigger. Perhaps an invisible gas, or a frequency transmitted through the heat. The Americans would disguise it as something mundane, something they carry everywhere. A lighter, brilliant and diabolical." Hans, a pragmatic man focused on explosives, was skeptical, but overridden by the Major's undeniable fear. "So, what is the new order?" "There is no order," Fisher stated firmly. "The Major is compromised, but the weapon, the Zippo device, is now in the hands of an enemy low on the command chain, a mere boy. We must retrieve it before it's dissected by Allied intelligence. This is a matter of national security, a threat to the... We will go after them. We will get the device." Their new objective was clear: the Coast Guard boy, Leo Maxwell, and the chrome-plated box in his pocket. Meanwhile, Leo delivered Richter to the astonished guard at Station 31. His report was met with immediate overwhelming skepticism by Captain Doyle, a man whose wartime experience consisted mostly of paperwork and complaining about rations. "A U-boat crew, Private? On our beach? Maxwell, you've been reading too many pulp magazines," Bill grumbled, adjusting his... "You captured a solitary lost German officer. It's commendable. But this talk of a secret weapon, a lighter? Honestly, son, you're exhausted." Leo felt his conviction falter under the captain's withering gaze. He took the Zippo from his pocket. "Sir, you didn't see his face. He went white. He called it the Beast, das Beast. There is something wrong with this man, sir, something he is hiding." Doyle snatched the lighter. "It's a cigarette lighter, Private, a common piece of Americana. Perhaps the Major simply has a pyrophobia. Now secure the prisoner and get some sleep. The war is not fought with novelty items." Partisul. Richter, watching the entire exchange from his makeshift cell, offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The Americans did not suspect. Their own incredulity was his greatest shield, but the pursuit had already begun. Fisher, Kurt, and Hans, having shed their heavy U-boat gear, civilian clothes, scavenged from a nearby isolated fishing shack, were already on the move. They tracked the faint boot prints left in the wet sand, moving inland toward the glow of the distant city, New York. Their path was rough, crossing marshland and eventually intersecting a poorly maintained back road. Kurt, using his training in radio triangulation and an acute sense of observation, found what he was looking for: the discarded wrappings of an American chocolate and a distinct new drag mark in the soft dirt, the sign of a car being moved out of hiding, a fisherman's Model T, parked away from the... "They took the officer to the station, and then they'll move him to a larger facility," Fisher analyzed, his voice tight. "But the boy has the device. He will be dismissed, sent back to his patrol, or perhaps even home. He is our weakest link." Their desperation sharpened into calculated strategy. They knew the geography. The Major would be moved by train or road toward Manhattan for formal interrogation. Leo, if he was dismissed, would likely head back to the city where he lived. The crew split their forces. Hans would follow the prisoner's likely transport path, seeking an opportunity for an interception, while Fisher and Kurt would move on the city, locating the Coast Guard private and the Zippo device. As dawn broke, painting the low fog in hues of pale pink and orange, Leo was back on patrol, his mind wrestling with Captain Doyle's dismissal. He was still clutching the Zippo, which the captain had tossed back to him. He absent-mindedly flicked it open, staring at the small, perfect flame. Das Beast. He had to know the truth. This was no longer just about duty. It was about the profound, unsettling mystery in Richter's eyes. Just as he was about to put the lighter away, he noticed something the fog had hidden earlier, a fresh, clean scrape mark on the chrome of the Zippo. It wasn't wear and tear. It looked like a tiny, deliberate incision, a microscopic, almost unreadable symbol scratched just below the hinge. He hadn't noticed it before. Was it his father's doing? Or was it something else. The object was suddenly heavy in his hand, no longer a simple lighter, but an artifact hinting at a deeper, buried secret. Leo had been sent back to his post, a dismissed soldier holding an unproven threat. He was exactly where the German crew wanted him to be, alone, vulnerable, and holding the only object that mattered. Leo's attempt to decipher the tiny scratch on the Zippo quickly led him nowhere. He tried scraping sand into the incision, holding it up to the pale morning light, but it was too minute to reveal any clear pattern, only a suggestion of two intersecting lines. The paranoia Captain Doyle had accused him of began to feel justified, fueled by the Major's terror. He had to get to a place with proper light and maybe, just maybe, a magnifying. He needed New York. He managed to secure an emergency leave on the pretext of an urgent family matter, hitching a ride west toward the city in the back of a supply truck. As the truck rumbled through the early morning, the wartime reality of America was evident. Posters urging conservation, women working factory jobs, and a constant underlying tension masked by determined cheerfulness. His destination was the old brownstone in Manhattan, where he lived with his aunt, a place of comforting routine far from the bleak coast. But he had a detour planned, a small specialized watch repair shop in the Lower East Side run by Mr. Alastair, a meticulous old clockmaker known for his impossibly steady hands and equally sharp vision. Meanwhile, Fisher and Kurt were already in the city, the urban sprawl providing excellent cover. They blended in easily, their dark foreign clothing indistinguishable from the wartime austerity enforced on New Yorkers. They were two shadows hunting one small flame. Their first stop, a prearranged dead drop, a hollowed-out stone in Central Park, where the U-boat had left emergency funds and communications gear for the initial sabotage. They found a small radio, a map of the city, and a newspaper clipping detailing Coast Guard deployment patterns. Their operational focus remained Leo Maxwell. "The boy is gone from the station," Fisher reported, scanning the Coast Guard notice board in a public library near the Brooklyn Bridge. "He requested emergency leave. He's in the city." "Good," Kurt replied, his mind focused on the technical. "If he thinks the object is important, he will try to analyze it. He will seek an expert, someone who can examine fine metalwork." Using the city map and his knowledge of specialized trades, Kurt began to triangulate possible locations. A museum? Too formal. A jeweler? Too obvious. A clockmaker or a precision instrument repairman. That was where a soldier would go to examine a scratch on brass. Leo, oblivious to hunters tracking his movements, found Mr. Alastair's shop on a narrow, shadowed. The tiny bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. The air smelled of oil, aged wood, and fine metal filing. Mr. Alastair, a wizened man with thick glasses perched low on his nose, looked up from his workbench. "Ah, Leo, back from your war games?" Leo quickly explained the situation, omitting the details about the U-boat, but emphasizing the Major's terrifying reaction and the minute scratch. He placed the Zippo on the counter. Alastair took the lighter and carefully positioned it under a high-powered lamp, then leaned in with a jeweler's loop. His silence stretched, broken only by the tick-tock of 100 timepieces. "A scratch, you say?" Alastair muttered, adjusting the loop. "Ah, yes. Not a scratch, Leo, an engraving, done with exceptional, almost surgical precision. And it is not American." He peered closer, his breath held. "It's a symbol, boy, a very old symbol. Not an insignia, but a personal. It looks like a stylized representation of a flame intersecting a compass rose." "No. Wait." Alastair paused. Then his hand trembled slightly, making the loop jump. He pulled back, his face pale. "Mr. Alastair, what is it?" Leo demanded, leaning in, the suspense tightening his chest. The old man swallowed, his eyes wide. "Leo, this symbol, I have seen it before, in Germany, decades ago. It was the personal mark of an elite, secretive society among certain upper-echelon military families. They called themselves the Flammenkinder, the children of the flame." Before Alastair could elaborate, the bell above the door jingled sharply, a loud intrusive sound that shattered the quiet. Fisher and Kurt stood in the doorway, their eyes immediately locking onto the chrome object or the lamp. Disguised, they were simply blending, and now they were full. "Do not move, old man," Fisher commanded, his English cold, and he carried a heavy, lead-weighted blackjack concealed in his coat. "The metal box. Hand it over. Now." Leo reacted instantly. He realized Alistair's life was in danger. He swept the Zippo into his pocket, grabbed a heavy brass pendulum weight from the counter, and hurled it toward a shelf of intricate lock mechanisms. Crash! The resulting explosion of springs, glass, and gears provided a precious second of cover. Leo grabbed Alistair, shoving the old man towards a back door. "Go!" "Call the police?" "The mark. Tell me what it means." "The Flammenkinder!" Alistair shouted back, scrambling into the shadows. They were obsessed with fire and fear. They used fire to... His words were cut off as Fisher lunged. Leo dodged the swing of the blackjack, the wind whistling past his ear. He was a Coast Guard, not a street fighter, but the fear was now. Kurt circled around, attempting to cut off his escape. It was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a vicious, desperate fight for an object whose importance had just escalated from secret weapon to clue to a terrifying secret society. The scraped symbol was the key, and the German crew was willing to kill to keep its meaning buried. Leo plunged out the side door, the shadows of the two relentless pursuers closing in behind him. Leo fled into the labyrinthine alleys of the Lower East Side, the midday sun struggling to penetrate the canyons of the tenement buildings. The weight of the Zippo in his pocket was a heavy, burning presence. Flammenkinder, children of the flame, used fire to create fear. The words echoed Mr. Alistair's fragmented warning, connecting the terrifying symbol to Major Richter's shattered control. He ducked into an abandoned loading dock, panting, checking the exit. He knew Fisher and Kurt were disciplined, relentless. They would analyze his likely movements, the home of a young single man in his aunt's brownstone. He decided against going home immediately. He needed answers, and he only had two potential sources, the Zippo itself or the captured Major Richter. Richter was inaccessible, guarded at Station 31, but the lighter was still in his hand. He found a secluded park bench and pulled out the Zippo. The symbol, the flame intersecting the compass rose, now held a sinister resonance. He realized the real secret was not a weapon, but a powerful psychological trigger, linked to a childhood trauma or a twisted indoctrination. Just as he was examining the symbol again, he noticed something else about the Zippo that had been obscured by the chaos. The initials LM were engraved on the back, but on the side opposite the hinge, an almost invisible line of smaller script was etched, K.R. 1938. K.R. Klaus Richter, 1938. 5 years ago, before the war, before the Major was a U-boat commander. The lighter wasn't his father's. It was Richter's, lost or abandoned, and somehow re-engraved with Leo's initials. The mystery deepened and twisted. Why would the Major have such a profound reaction to an object he once owned? And how did it end up in Leo's hands? He felt a surge of cold dread. This wasn't a random capture. This was a personal ghost haunting Richter. And Leo was merely the unwitting messenger. He needed to confirm the connection. He used a payphone in a dark-cornered drugstore, risking exposure, and called Station 31. He spoke to the officer on desk duty, feigning a need to confirm a prisoner's inventory. "I need the Major's full name, rank, and any personal effects listed." The board officer relayed the information. "Major Klaus Richter, Kriegsmarine. Only personal effect was a small German-issued naval compass. Nothing else." Leo hung up, his heart pounding. Richter hadn't been searched properly, or he had disposed of the lighter, which was now in Leo's pocket. The lighter was the key to the Major's fear, and the engraving K.R. 1938 confirmed it was tied to his past. As he stepped out of the drugstore, a flash of movement caught his eye, a dark sedan pulling rapidly to the curb a block away. Kurt and Fisher had tracked the phone call. They were closing in. Leo sprinted down the sidewalk, cutting into a busy market street, the crowd his only defense. He had to get to the Major. He had to exchange the lighter for the truth before the desperate German crew cornered him. He managed to lose them temporarily, boarding an elevated train, heading toward the station's location on Long Island. He spent the entire journey formulating a plan. He couldn't go in through the main gates. The Germans would be watching. He had to access Richter in the holding cell, alone. Back at Station 31, Captain Doyle had just received a panicked call from a fisherman. His Model T was gone, and he'd found discarded foreign uniforms on the beach. Doyle's skepticism evaporated, replaced by cold terror. His captured major was not a lone straggler. He was part of an active team. Security was heightened, but the facility was small and unprepared for a siege. Meanwhile, Hans, the demolition expert, had been shadowing the prison transport route. He realized the major wasn't being moved yet, but he had observed the station's weak spot, the inadequate fencing, and the poorly lit back entrance to the holding area. He realized his comrades would go after the boy, while he should be prepared to exploit the inevitable confusion at the station. Leo arrived after sunset, the station ringed with extra guards. He recognized the sentry at the back gate, a young man named Peterson. Leo flashed his Coast Guard eyed his charm. "Peterson, I need to see the major. It's a classified ID issue from HQ. They want to confirm some details on his person before the transfer." Peterson, flustered by the supposed classified nature of the request, let him. Leo found the cell block dimly lit. Major Richter sat on the cot, his posture still rigidly. He looked up as Leo approached, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. "You again, Private Maxwell," Richter stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "A dangerous obsession for a boy." Leo pulled out the Zippo and flipped it open, the flame springing to life. He held it up, watching the major's face. Richter flinched, but controlled it instantly. "You are obsessed with fire," Leo whispered, his voice intense. "You owned this lighter in 1938, the Flammenkinder, the Children of the Flame. Tell me what it is. Tell me why your men think this is a secret weapon, or I will hand this over to Allied intelligence, and they will pull the truth from you, piece by piece." Richter looked at the flame, then at Leo, then at the small, almost unreadable KR 1938 inscription, a sound of profound exhaustion. The terror on the beach was not a weapons of, it was the reawakening of a devastating old truth. "This is not a weapon. It is a memory," Richter confessed, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "A fire in my childhood, in my family's factory in Essen. It was arson, covered up. My father, a member of that vile society, the Flammenkinder, used fire as a tool of purification, of creating fear. I witnessed it. It was the night I realized what he truly was." He paused, his gaze distant. "My men believe in a technological secret because they must. The truth is simpler, and far more damaging to a decorated German major. I am terrified of fire because it represents my father's madness and my own shame." He leaned forward, his eyes suddenly urgent. "But my men are convinced. They are here in the city. They will kill you to get that lighter. You are in greater danger than you realize." At that very moment, a distant metallic crunch echoed from the perimeter, followed by a muffled percussive thump, the sound of an expertly placed charge. Hans had breached the back wall. The lights flickered and died. A shadow fell across the cell door. Fisher and Kurt had found their way in, drawn by the silence and the brief telltale flicker of the Zippo's flame through the cell's tiny window. The hunt was over, and the confrontation was now a matter of life and death, locked in a dark, vulnerable cell block. Darkness enveloped the cell block. Alarms began to wail sporadically, their sound distorted by the power failure. Leo slammed the Zippo shut and tucked it deep into his pocket. He was trapped between the armed German crew on one side and a desperate, traumatized major on the other. "They are here for the lighter, Major," Leo whispered, pressing himself against the bars. "They won't hesitate to kill you too, if you get in their way." Richter surprisingly was calm. The confession had stripped him bare, leaving a man ready to face his fear, whether it was the memory of the fire or the actual flames of conflict. "They will try to retrieve the device and ensure my silence, but I am their commanding officer. I still hold a measure of authority." Outside the cell, the shadows moved. Fisher and Kurt, guns drawn, were navigating the dark corridor. Hans was positioned outside the station, ready to provide a diversion or an escape route. "Maxwell, we know you are in there!" Fisher's voice was a harsh echo in the corridor. "Hand over the device. This does not have to end violently." "It's not a weapon," Leo shouted back, gripping the cool metal of the cell door. "It's just a lighter. You were all mistaken." A burst of gunfire ripped through the wooden door of an adjacent cell, a warning shot. "Lies!" Kurt yelled. "You have seen the Major's reaction. Do not insult our intelligence, American." Leo realized he couldn't reason with them. Their conviction was rooted in the primal terror they had witnessed in their commander. A terror far more potent than any logic. He had to use the one thing they feared, or rather, the one thing they misunderstood, to break their will. Richter, sensing Leo's intention, spoke softly. "The Zippo is my weakness, Private, but it is your strength. Show them the beast." Leo nodded, taking a deep breath. This was it, the climax of the entire terrifying misunderstanding. He knew he was playing a dangerous psychological game, betting his life on the power of a lie they had convinced themselves was true. He pulled the lighter out and, the steady hand, flicked the wheel. Click, thwump. The small, bright flame reappeared, a beacon in the absolute dark. Leo held it steady, positioning so the light danced on his face, making him look defiant and terrifyingly confident. The effect on the German crew was immediate. Fisher staggered back, his gun wavering. Kurt gasped, dropping into a defensive crouch. "The frequency! He's activating the device!" Kurt shrieked, covering his head. "Do not look at the flame, Fisher. It controls the mind." Fisher, a man of raw physical courage, fought the paralyzing fear induced by the memory of his major's collapse. He fired blindly toward the cell. The bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the concrete wall beside Leo. Richter seized the moment. He placed his hands on the bars and spoke in a booming, commanding voice, reverting to the authoritarian tone of a U-boat commander. "Still stand! Halt!" The unexpected command, delivered by their supposedly mind-controlled leader, momentarily stunned Fisher. "The American is controlling him, sir. It's working," Kurt insisted, his voice trembling. "You fools!" Richter roared, his face illuminated by the flickering Zippo flame. "There is no device. You have been hunting a lie. This is nothing but a lighter, and you have abandoned your mission and jeopardized the safety of the U-boat for a mere superstitious fantasy." He paused, then delivered the final, crippling blow of authority. "Your actions constitute mutiny and dereliction of duty under the enemy's nose. Now drop your weapons and secure the breach immediately. Das ist ein Befehl. That is an order." Richter's commanding presence, combined with the terrifying psychological weight of the secret weapon flame, proved too much for the two men. Fisher, torn between the visceral fear of the device and the ingrained, career-ending horror of disobeying a direct order from his major, slowly lowered his weapon. Kurt, completely broken by the power of frequency, simply dropped his gun and sank to his. Leo quickly used the moment, snapping the Zippo shut and plunging the corridor back into darkness. The sound of Richter's surrender was the true psychological victory. Outside, Hans, hearing the sudden silence and the cessation of gunfire, assumed the mission had failed. He triggered a final, smaller, diversionary charge and fled into the night, escaping the perimeter before backup arrived. Chaos gave way to resolution. Backup arrived, and Fisher and Kurt were quickly apprehended. The entire German crew, save for the fleeing Hans, was in custody. Leo Maxwell, standing under the returning emergency lights, handed the Zippo over to Captain Doyle. Doyle, who now looked gray and shell-shocked, stared at the lighter, his skepticism crushed by the reality of the sabotage attempt and the two captured, terrified Germans. Richter was taken away for high level, and before leaving, he looked back at Leo. "You used my fear, Private. You turned a lighter into a command tool. You have a terrible strength." "You gave me the truth, Major," Leo ripped, the weight of the war finally settling on his shoulders. "That's a greater strength." The investigation revealed the full story, the failed sabotage, the crew's panicked misinterpretation, and Major Richter's personal trauma tied to the Flammenkinder Society, a sinister domestic secret within the German High Command. The lighter, once Richter's, had been given to Leo's father, a merchant mariner, years before in a pre-war dockside exchange, and then gifted to Leo. The irony was profound. The secret that drove the adventure was not military intelligence, but personal, deep psychological trauma. Leo Maxwell was commended. Official report was redacted. The details of the Zippo device and the Major's confession were deemed too bizarre and too potentially demoralizing to include in public records. The war, they decided, must remain a fight against guns and bombs, not against ghosts and childhood fears. For Leo, the incident was a crucible. He had entered the war as an inexperienced, nervous boy and emerged as a man who understood that the greatest battle often occurs not on the front lines, but within the human mind. He learned the terrifying power of misunderstanding and the courage required to confront a truth more complex than simple good and evil. He continued his Coast Guard service with a new depth, ready for the long fight ahead, carrying the heavy memory of a flame that broke a German major and forged an American man.